Hello, I'm Kerry Gorgone with Appfire, and this is the best project portfolio management show by Appfire. Today we have Michelle Bartonico back with us to talk about what data you should pull together before kicking off a project, like when do you need to have data during your project. We're going to talk about ways to get it, and what if people think they don't need it. We're talking about that. We're going to cover all the things, so stick around.
You've got questions about PPM, but you're afraid to ask? Well, wait no longer. Appfire presents the best project portfolio management show by Appfire.
Michelle, thanks for coming back. So first and foremost, I feel like I have to ask, what if people are like, data? Pff, we don't need data. I know what people want. I know what our audience needs.
Yeah, and that happens probably more often than we like to admit. And I've done it myself quite often. If I've been in a position where it's just like you just want to move things along, you don't want to feel like you're slowing down. And so you'll definitely run into it as a project manager or even just as a team member on a project where you've got internal or external stakeholders and they're saying, look, we've just got pressure to just start delivering. We just got to start kicking this off, creating the milestones, starting to deliver. I'm here because I represent area A, and then you're here representing area B. So can't you speak to those things? Surely you can do that, right? That's why you're selected for this project. And that may be true. That might be partially true, but it's always really important if you can to validate those opinions or those assumptions. Or if nothing else, when you're creating your project charter, so when you're first starting off your project and you're putting together your project charter and you're starting to have that discovery kickoff meeting, you can put all of those assumptions into that document and you can say, okay, this is based on historical information. We've done a similar project, or this person. So in my world, you might say in a university setting, someone might say, I work with students all the time. I hear students talk about X, Y, Z. So let's go ahead and kind of make that assumption that they think this. That, again, may be perfectly accurate.
But it might not be.
But it might not be. And it also might be that later on in your project, you want to segment that a little bit more. And you want to say, okay, well, what about if it's sliced with this socioeconomic group versus just a blanket statement that kind of
All
provides an assumption about
like
everyone.
This.
So
then if we're saying, when do I incorporate data into my project? It's like at the beginning and then throughout, pretty much.
At the beginning and then throughout. And there are different ways to gather data. So there's the market research, which is one type that you can sort of gather. So there's like the benchmarking. You can kind of brainstorm, which is what I was talking about before, where somebody says, this is what I assume, this is what I think is true. There's focus groups. So those are often, a lot of the times you have focus groups, interviews, brainstorming, you've got benchmarking, all of those types of things, market research, things you can get your hands on or proactively get right away at the onset. Those are things that typically happen in the initiation, kind of in that pre-planning stage. And then to your point, there are definitely different techniques throughout a project lifecycle that you might want to use different ways to gather data. So for example, checklists to make sure quality control is happening, or you've got questionnaires and surveys to follow up on some of those assumptions throughout your project. And other ones might be, you've heard of check sheets or like tally sheets. And again, those are things that are more for quality control. So if you're thinking about, did something happen? Did this occur? Did this occur with this group of individuals? Those are things that you can track and learn about throughout your project at different points.
I have this friend named Tom Webster who works at Edison Research. They do the exit polling for elections and stuff. And one of the tips he gave me years ago was to try and prove myself wrong. So if I have an assumption about the group of people I'm about to do a project for, set out to prove what I think is incorrect. Because then I'll look at the evidence differently than if I'm trying to validate what I already think.
Yeah.
Is that something you recommend?
That's definitely an approach for sure that you can take. And one of the things that I've seen be successful in my projects, and I've loved working on projects with people who do this, is at the beginning of a project, they set out guiding principles. This is how we're going to work. This is how we're going to think. And there was a former dean of students at Trinity, and I'm sure he'll love that I'm plugging him here, but he did a phenomenal job at laying out these ground rules. And he would say things kind of to your point there of, we're going to not make assumptions we can't try to validate, or we're not going to bring dirty laundry with us to this project. So in other words, if there was an experience we had once with a stakeholder or once with a certain group of students or consumers, we're not going to say, well, that's just how they all are. We're going to actually go back and we're going to look at what we have currently versus what we thought we had and can apply to now.
That could even make your project like not necessary, right? If they're like, well, students need this, and then you look into it and they're like, no, we don't. We don't want that.
It can make it not unnecessary, or it can make it can alter it. And so that is sometimes one of the reasons that people get a little squeamish when you say, let's conduct research, because
they don't want to know the answer.
They don't know the answer. There's pressure, right? There's pressure to say, okay, look, I have an executive sponsor. They really want this done. They've set the goals. Some of them are arbitrary. Some of them aren't. Doesn't really matter. And we just got to get started. Like, they're going to start asking me for deliverables. And so the thought of potentially pausing or having to go back to somebody with a senior title, most likely, and say, look, I don't really think this is what you want anymore, or this is what I found. Are you sure we want to go down that path? But my recommendation there would be at least offer that, and somebody can say, I hear you, but let's parking lot that. And if we get down this, for whatever reason, if we get down a path and it seems like we're validating the information that we should have maybe done earlier, then maybe we'll pause. And that's why it's important to have continuous conversations with your executive sponsor and with other leaders and stakeholders to just say, look, I might not be able to bring you along right away, and you have significant influence. And so we're just not going to hold up this project right now, but I do want us to take a little bit of time and at least agree that we're going to conduct this technique, and maybe we can also compromise and agree to revisit it after the first milestone. So something like that.
New research, but what about what you already have, like any kind of historical documents or data that you might already have gathered?
That's gravy. That's stuff that if somebody can bring to the table and say, so for example, we've worked on student retention projects before, and part of that is perhaps mental health or student success, academic success. And so you have somebody at the table who has the research or has the checklists that they've been gathering, has the surveys that they have, and they could bring that and input it into the project at the very onset. And so those are great insights and learnings that the whole team should have. And ideally, if you can't spend a lot of time conducting new research, hopefully the people who are selected for your project have already been doing some of that groundwork, and they can offer some of that historical data or you
ask them for it, right? Because they might not even think about it. Like, hey, does anybody have any data relating to this? Or
absolutely. And
before we drop $100,000 on this parking lot project or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and you can do some of that in the very beginning so if you're assigned to be the project manager or the team lead, when you establish some expectations up front and say, hey, I just wanted to send a quick email. You all have been selected for being part of this project team. Really excited. If you have information that you think would be helpful for this temporary goal or temporary project charter theme that we have, then please bring it to the first meeting, or feel free to share it with me beforehand if you're unsure.
Don't keep it to yourself until the end of the project.
Yes, don't keep it to yourself. And that's another thing you can put in your guiding principles. If you wanted to go that route when you set up your project team, you can say, again, ask questions early and often, bring things to the table, share. And it's information that's really helpful. And all of those are data points that you might not have a trend for, but at least it's something that you can have knowledge of. You want to have known knowns, right? And known unknowns. You don't want to just be completely blindsided.
And don't just plunge in.
Yeah,
Thank you
don't
so much, Michelle. So get that data early, use it often, get more data. You just can't have enough data.
can't have enough.
Thanks, thanks for joining us for the Best Project Portfolio Management Show. You can find more episodes at Appfire.